Example 4, find y in radians if y equals inverse cosecant of -3. I think this is a little bit harder to start with, so I'm going to start with the easier one. Let's try inverse cosine of 0.4. Okay? Let's find the inverse cosine of 0.4, and we want to do it in radians. So let's just make sure we're in radians. And all we have to do is type in inverse cosine of 0.4. And that gets us 1.159, let's say. So that's 1.159. Okay, so that's the what. What we'd have to look at is look at the range for inverse cosine. The range for inverse cosine is from 0 to pi. And so that means that this is defined from 0 to pi. That means first or second quadrant. And basically, any positive value, when this is positive, this 0.4, if that's positive, that's going to put us in the first quadrant. And since that 0.4 is positive, we know we're in the first quadrant. And so when we do what, the calculator gives us what? 1.159, but we have to look at the where and think about this as being in that first quadrant. It's in the first quadrant, and the good thing about first quadrant is it just is what it is, and so that's the answer. If we had done a negative 0.4, that would have put us in the second quadrant. Okay, and so if you think about what's going to happen in the second quadrant. Okay, let's just use our calculator and see what happens. So we've got inverse cosine of negative 0.4 gives us 1.982. 1.982. 1.982. Now that seems like it's different. That seems a little bit confusing, but it really should be the same kind of result. That 1.159 is kind of like a reference angle. And if you remember, pi is 3.14. If we took pi and subtracted that 1.159, that should give us our 1.982. And so we're looking at 1.982 as the answer, but you can find it using either this or just looking straight at the calculator. Okay, so let's try one. Let's try one that's in degrees. If I did inverse cosine of negative 0.6, and I want the answer in degrees. Make sure we're in degrees. Just type it in, inverse cosine negative 0.6, 127 degrees or so. Let's just call it 127 degrees. And that puts us into the second quadrant. That's where we need it. Okay, of course that's in the second quadrant. We knew that was going to be the second quadrant when that number was negative. So there still is this concept of what and where. But now, let's look at the original problem. It says find y in radians if y equals inverse cosecant of -3. Well, we don't have an inverse cosecant button. So what we're going to do is take the reciprocal. Reciprocal of cosecant is sine. So let's look at the inverse sine of -1/3. Take the reciprocal. We can plug this in the calculator. We need to be in radians. But we're going to do inverse sine of -1/3. And that gives us this value. Okay? Negative 0.3398. Negative 0.3398. Now don't forget, you need to look at your range. And for inverse cosecant, the range is from -pi/2 to +pi/2. So what I like to do is I just look at it and say, am I allowed to have a negative number? And since the range goes from -pi/2 to +pi/2, or quadrants 1 and 4, I'm allowed to have a negative number. I'm allowed to have a negative answer. That's what's going to put me into that fourth quadrant. So since I'm allowed to have a negative answer, I'm going to circle it. That's it. So So then the next one wants the degrees of arc cotangent or inverse cotangent. To do this, I'm also going to take the reciprocal function, inverse tangent of this reciprocal. And so if you're looking at your calculator, this one wants degrees. So inverse tangent of 1 over negative 0.3241 would be negative 72. Okay, negative 72 degrees. Let's just estimate. Okay, but I think the question always has to be, am I allowed to have negative answers? And so when you look at the range for inverse cotangent, the range for inverse cotangent is from 0 to pi. And what that's telling me is my output is not allowed to be negative. If we were in degrees, maybe it's easier to understand. In degrees, that's from 0 to 180. 0 to pi, same thing, 0 to 180. I'm not allowed to have a negative answer. My answer has to be in between 0 and 180. So, think about where we are. From 0 to 180 means we're in quadrant 1 or 2. But the negative, the negative is going to happen in the second quadrant here. That's where, that's where tangent, cotangent, or negative is in that second quadrant. And so you should really just look at this as a 72 degree reference angle. It's a 72 degree reference angle in that second quadrant. And so what angle is that? Well, you would find that because it's 72 degrees before you get to 180. Well, 180 minus 72 is 108. This answer 108 degrees.